President Donald Trump delivered his first speech before the United Nations General Assembly this morning, telling the gathering of global leaders that he will always put America first.
Will forever be a great friend to the world, and especially to its allies. But we can no longer be taken advantage of or enter into a one-sided deal where the United States gets nothing in return. As long as I hold this office, I will defend America's interests above all else. But in fulfilling our obligations to our own nations, we also realize that it's in everyone's interest to seek a future where all nations can be sovereign, prosperous, and secure.
Well, the president also threatened to totally destroy, his words, North Korea over its nuclear weapons program. Listen.
No one has shown more contempt for other nations and for the well-being of their own people than the depraved regime in North Korea. It is responsible for the starvation deaths of millions of North Koreans and for the imprisonment, torture, killing, and oppression of countless more. The United States has great strength and patience. But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about. That's what the United Nations is for. Let's see how they do. It is time for North Korea to realize that the denuclearization is its only acceptable future.
And President Trump also blasted the Iran nuclear deal and called out Iran's ruling regime for sponsoring terrorist organizations.
The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me. It is time for the entire world to join us in demanding that Iran's government end its pursuit of death and destruction. It is time for the regime to free all Americans and citizens of other nations that they have unjustly detained. And above all, Iran's government must stop supporting terrorists, begin serving its own people, and respect the sovereign rights of its neighbors.
Joining us now from the United Nations is NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Secretary General, when you hear the President of the United States pushing an America First policy, what is your reaction? What does that phrase mean to you and other world leaders?
Well, we have heard that message from President Trump before. What is important for me is that the United States has so clearly, and also President Trump has so clearly, expressed a strong commitment to NATO and to the transatlantic bond, not only in words but also in deeds, by increasing their contributions and increasing the U.S. presence, military presence in Europe. And I also welcome the importance of UN reform, which was a message from both President Trump but also from Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres.
Yeah, do you agree with the president, though, when he talked about the Iran nuclear deal? He called it an embarrassment.
No deal will be useful if it's not implemented, and therefore the focus now should be on how to make sure that the deal is fully implemented, making sure that Iran is not able to develop new nuclear weapons. And I also welcome the fact that the permanent members of the UN Security Council and Germany, key nations in negotiating that deal, will meet tomorrow and discuss the way forward. The important thing is that Iran totally comply with the deal and stop the development of nuclear weapons.
And yet, Mr. Secretary General, independent watchdogs have said that it appears that Iran is complying with the framework of the nuclear deal. And those countries that you mentioned, part of the UN Security Council, they have not voiced the similar concerns the President of the United States has.
But the United States is one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and I think it's extremely important that those nations, together with Germany, sit down and assess the implementation of the deal, and that they agree on the way forward. Because regardless of what we think about the deal, if we are not united in our approach to Iran, if we're not standing together in pushing and working for Iran stopping their nuclear programs, then we will not succeed. So the important thing now is that the countries will meet, sit down, and then hopefully agree on the way forward, including how to make sure that the Iran deal is fully implemented.
As we were listening to the president's speech, I thought some of this may feel actually familiar to you as the Secretary General of NATO. The president was particularly critical of NATO during his campaign, calling it obsolete. He has also been critical of the United Nations, calling it, among other things, not a friend to democracy. When you met with the president, though, you came away feeling like he had a commitment to NATO. I'm wondering what you make of this president, the way he uses rhetoric versus his actual foreign policy.
President Trump is a president that often uses very strong language, and today he did that in the speech he delivered to the UN General Assembly. For me, the important thing as Secretary General is the actions, and what we have seen is that the United States is committed to NATO and is not only doing that in words but also in deeds. When it comes to the UN, I think we all have to understand that, especially in times with turmoil, uncertainty, we need strong international institutions. And when they are functioning, they can actually help us solve big problems and also create a more stable and secure security environment. But then we need well-functioning, fit and effective institutions. We need an effective UN. And therefore, I think it's extremely important to reform the UN. And that is also the reason why I support the initiative by the Secretary General of the UN to reform this organization.
Mr. Secretary General, the President used some very tough language on North Korea. Clearly, the points that he laid out, the brutality of the regime, killing its own people, jailing dissidents, everyone who embraces democracy will agree with the President on that. But then he used the language, he threatened North Korea with total destruction, and he called its leader, Kim Jong-un, Rocket Man. Is that sort of rhetoric helpful in your view, not necessarily from the standpoint of the UN Security Council or NATO, but from Kim Jong-un, who will hear that and use that as rationale for doing some of the things that he's done?
Again, this is yet another example of that President Trump often uses very strong rhetoric and strong language. What I welcome is the unity we have seen in the international community in condemning North Korea developing nuclear weapons and long-range missiles, and also the importance of working together to make sure that North Korea abandon its nuclear and missile programs and refrain for more testing, because this is a threat towards all of us. It's a global threat and it requires a global response. There is no easy way out, no easy answer, but we need to find something in between doing nothing, just watching North Korea developing new nuclear weapons, and using military force, which can be very dangerous. And therefore, we need to continue to work for a political, diplomatic solution supported by very strong economic sanctions against North Korea.
You've warned about some other, what you believe is threatening behavior, the growing threats from Russia as Russia conducts these military drills on the borders of Eastern Europe. Why do you think that this is such a major concern for you and for NATO?
Because we have seen a military buildup of Russia over time, and the exercise which is taking place now is part of a pattern where they are exercising more forces in a more aggressive way. All nations have the right to exercise their forces. That is also the case for Russia. But we need to be transparent and predictable, because with more military activity, with higher tensions, there is an increased risk for incidents and accidents. and we have to prevent them, and if they happen, make sure that they don't spiral out of control. And therefore we need transparency, and Russia has not been transparent about their exercises over many years.
Would you have hoped that the president spoke more on that in his speech? He sort of touched on Russia a little bit.
Yes, and again, the speech is important, but even more important are actions. And what we have seen in Europe is that European allies are stepping up. They are now investing more in defense. So we are moving towards a more fair burden sharing within the alliance, which has been an important message from the US and from President Trump. But we also see that the US is increasing its military presence in Europe. And we have deployed 4 battle groups to the eastern part of the alliance, sending a very strong message that an attack on one NATO ally will trigger the response from the whole alliance.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, sir, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.